Thank you for speaking with me. What are you hearing from your networks in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe at the moment, and also from WHO and the European Commission?
Well, I wanted to say from the outset, Matt, what a huge learning experience this has been for the European Cancer Organization and for me personally, you know, to be trying in some small way to be helping the impact of the war in Ukraine on cancer, particularly patients from the Ukraine who've been forced to move either to another part of Ukraine or across the border. I think some of my reflections are, you know, and this is, I guess we're a month in now, and it feels like every day is different. You learn something new every day, mostly from people who are in the Ukraine and who are very generous with their time and their insight. I think I've been overwhelmed by the massive response within the cancer community. We all know that the cancer community can be fragmented at times because of different passions, different experiences. There are so many different kinds of cancer. They affect people in different ways at different stages of their lives, and cancer touches all of us either personally or through someone we love. And that gives people working in the cancer community a certain passion for their bit of the cancer problem. And sometimes that means, sadly, that we don't all speak with one voice. And I think that this is the first time I've seen the cancer community speaking with one voice in relation to the international solidarity with Ukraine and the real concern of the community to help in any way possible Ukrainian cancer patient refugees. So that, I suppose that's the first thing. The second thing is that I sense that for oncologists in Ukraine and patient organizations in Ukraine trying to help cancer patients, the last week has been really tough in seeing the pictures from Bucha, amongst other places. I think in the conversations that I'm having, this has, you know, changed the tone of the conversation completely, in that, of course, there was a real positive national spirit within Ukraine, healthcare professionals and patient groups, a real passionate defense of the country, right? But I think people have found it unbearable to see the scenes, you know, in the cities around and towns around Kyiv, and for people, especially who work in healthcare, to see that done deliberately to their brothers and sisters of their own nationality is, you know, oftentimes just minutes from where they live, is changing the level of horror in all of this. And of course, what's tricky about the work of the Special Network, Matt, is that on one hand, we know that people fleeing Ukraine, people fleeing danger in Ukraine, we know that in a way cancer is a secondary issue, right? Survival in that moment from those attacks is, and the injuries sustained by many people in Ukraine from those attacks, if they were not fatal, you know, that's a massive priority to deal with those issues. And you could say, as a cancer community, well, you know, people will get to cancer when when we get to it, and those headline issues that we see on the news at night should be the priority. But the reality is that those of us working in the cancer community know that cancer doesn't wait for anything. We went through all of this with COVID. And so we almost have a responsibility not to say cancer's more important than anything else, but to say we've got the knowledge, we've got the contacts, we as a family have the connections to help people who are on the move from Ukraine. And we want to, in as coordinated a fashion as we can, respond to the crisis. So I think on one hand, it feels like we're doing a very small bit, right? And on the other hand, it feels like we've got a real responsibility to do our bit. And I think the special network, particularly with the support of ASCO, has been fundamental in demonstrating the unity of the cancer community to try and help in small ways, whether that's providing information in Ukrainian or other languages for people on the move to other countries, whether it's trying to matchmake an offer to help with a request for help, which we're doing a little bit of. We're seeing communications from individuals in Ukraine trying to get help and connecting those people with people who can help. You know, these are small things, but they're important ones. And I think that the other big thing, and I'm going to let you talk in a second, Matt, the other big thing, while I get this off my chest, is that in the initial response to the Ukraine war, it's natural that governments take time to sort themselves out, right? Governments are big tankers, they don't move so fast. And on the other hand, patient organizations, individual doctors, nurses, pharmacists, you know, individual hospitals who can move fast with individual patients. And that's where you saw the amazing work done by St. Jude's and PSYOP and Childhood Cancer International, you know, getting kids out as early as possible. Amazing work, moving faster than any government machine could do, right? So because of that, in the early weeks of the response, there's been sometimes a bit of a disconnect between the protocols and the processes that governments by nature have to set in place when you're talking about moving people from one country to another. And you've got the reality on the ground that is that people talk to each other, help each other, drive across borders to get people out of there, right? That's a very brave, human, kind action. At some point in this war, those two things need to get closer together, because the governmental side needs to recognize the amazing capacity of individuals, doctors, hospitals, patient groups. But also, it's natural that the system needs to improve, because we're in this for the long haul. This is not going to be over in a short time, and we need a system to be able to cope as much as possible. So yeah, a lot of learning, I guess, is my headline of that.
Right, and I completely identify with what you mean by doing every little bit that we can, and I completely understand how it feels like to be, well, for me as a civilian across the pond, figuring out what we can do to help. Yeah, so you and I were in touch in the early days of the formation of the ECO ASCO Special Network. What has transpired since then, and I guess what should our audience be paying attention to?
Well, I think that people involved in cancer care, cancer prevention and care, have a natural instinct towards equity and equality of access to treatment, access to information. I think everybody working in the cancer community has that instinct for equity. And we know that in Europe, with all of its different governments and languages and institutions, already had an equity problem, an equality problem in terms of access, and without overgeneralizing, somewhat of an east-west divide in access to cancer care, which was already identified by the European Union as being unacceptable. So the Beating Cancer Plan and the EU Cancer Mission are governmental pan-European devices to inject 4 billion euros into levelling up cancer care, to ensure that somebody who suffers from cancer in Romania doesn't have a completely different experience or life expectancy to somebody in France, right? That was there already, that problem. Now you've seen in those same countries an influx of however many it is, 4.5 million refugees, yeah. And some of those people know that they've got cancer. Some of the people don't know they've got cancer. Some of those people will get cancer, and that's going to put an enormous strain on already stressed cancer systems. And I think for your readers, the quality of your publication being who it is and the audience that I imagine reads the cancer letter, I think we've got to be responding in the short term to what, as best we can, but we've got to start thinking about the medium to long term of this, because not all those 4 billion people are going to go back whenever this ends. And what are the reactions going to be longer term when this comes down the pecking order of headlines? And how will those cancer or healthcare systems cope? And how will a level of equity between national citizens in those countries and Ukrainian refugees be managed? And so it's about the scale, but also about the tone of equity around the whole thing. And I think that is, we've never seen anything like that scale, and I think we have a responsibility to start thinking about how that's going to be addressed in parallel to dealing with the emergency.
Off the top of your head, what are some of the other emerging challenges in the network's response to the crisis? Or are you seeing that existing issues are amplified by the escalating situation and as more Ukrainians are displaced?
I think that in this sort of situation, you see the best of people and the worst of people. And the best of people, we're seeing incredible numbers of attempts to get medicines, other supplies, medical supplies into Ukraine. And that effort is really amazing, but it's all uncoordinated in many respects. And it's the personal networks and contacts of different people trying to help. And of course, many of the supplies that are needed in Ukraine, cancer doesn't start at the top of the list. You know, you're talking about people with war injuries needing to survive. So I think all of the acts of generosity and kindness and energy, positive energy to do something has been amazing. Sometimes the lack of coordination of that creates challenges. And the worst thing would be if those challenges were pulling Ukrainian healthcare professionals away from caring for patients. I don't think we're at that point, but you can imagine that there's that risk. There's also an increasing desire, I think, increasing atmosphere within Ukraine that they want their citizens to stay. And where possible, to be treated in the 8 cancer centres that we think are still functioning pretty much the same as they were. Now that puts a huge demand on the people, like in Lviv, for example, puts a huge stress on those hospitals and on those healthcare professionals working in those hospitals. On the other hand, you know, there are new teams of healthcare professionals arriving from the east of Ukraine in hospitals in the west that are now joining the team to be able to help. So I think all of that effort and I think increasingly from neighboring countries you hear, we don't need extra supplies, get them to Ukraine. You know, where possible, Ukrainians treating Ukrainians in Ukraine is becoming more of a priority, I think, based on the conversations I have. But also, you know, the worst of people, we've seen people trying to take advantage of that situation, you know, on lists of medicines that don't look right at all. And you know, you would hope that nobody would do anything during a time like this for the wrong reasons, but you know, it's sometimes we have to sense check some of the information we get, and not everybody's an angel, you know. So that in itself, creating that extra work for people to be checking whether something's a legit request or not, you know, that's a distraction that people could do without. So yeah, I think that they are some of the challenges, you know, dealing with the sheer volume of kind offers and opportunities to help, but also trying to make sure that the stuff that's clearly wrong gets filtered out of the discussion.
And the response that we've been getting here in the United States is that your call to action has been one that is very much needed, I would say. How would you describe the response that you received, not only in Europe, but also in the US over the past month?
Well, I mean, we were very impacted by the initial number of requests for ECO to do something to help, and we were very energized and felt very supported when ASCO, which of course is a much bigger organization than ECO, wanted to help too. And so we kind of quickly came up with this idea of a special network. The special network idea came because we did something similar with COVID at ECO. We had a campaign called Time to Act, which you can see on timetoactcancer.com. And we did that in 30 languages, basically getting the word out, Matt, that don't let COVID stop you from tackling cancer, because of all the stay-at-home messages and all of that, people ignoring warning signs, missing appointments. And we did some research, data study, which showed that 1 million people were walking around Europe not knowing they had cancer because 100 million screening tests had been delayed or cancelled because of COVID, right? So we had a little bit of experience in mobilizing in multi-languages. And that experience last year taught us that if you're going to be a relevant organization in Europe and you're going to be passing on messages to cancer patients and their loved ones, you need to speak in their language. It's not enough to expect people to Google Translate stuff on your website, right? So that led both us and ASCO to invest in getting those resources up there. And the idea of Onco Help, which that website, onco-help.org, you can spell with a K as well, because some of the Eastern European countries spell Onco with a K. We did a very quick bit of research with Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans, and Onco and Help seemed to be buzzwords that work best rather than the word cancer, for example. And then we just did, we're signposting to work that other people have done, but we're trying to do it in one place. And all the work that ASCO do, we put there. We've done a big section on psychosocial support, because that very early on became a priority, that Ukrainian cancer patients who'd been fleeing the war not only had to deal with cancer and the fact they were leaving their homes, they also saw some horrible stuff along the way, that psychosocial support, dealing with the whole thing of being in another country with cancer, having witnessed all that, we're working together with ASCO on that. So the idea is, and we're evolving as we go, to try and address needs that are presented to us. And yeah, I mean, I think you could take the view that, working on a humanitarian crisis isn't, our particular USP as an organization. But when I went to my board and talked about it on the 7th of March, I think it was, I said, look, you need to decide how you see this as a priority, because if we go for this, we won't be able to do some other things, but you need to tell me where you see the priority. And unanimously said it was the priority of their lifetimes in oncology. So for the board, it was a no-brainer.
What are some of the tangible examples of the impact that the special network has had in Eastern Europe and Ukraine that you can tell so far?
Well, we know that individuals have been helped in different situations. We know that we've made connections between, for example, in Moldova, a hospital that needs a CT facilities, with somebody offering to give mobile CT facilities to that hospital. We know we've done some connectivity like that. We know that visits to our website from Ukraine have shot up, to a huge number. So we know that there are people in Ukraine visiting OncoHelp. So we know that people are accessing that information, which, considering it's a new website, is quite powerful. But I think the reality also is that and I think the other thing that's important is our advocacy work. I think the WHO and the EU are better off because of the intel that we've been able to gather from our community and share with them, so that if there are any gaps in their knowledge, and surely there are, because they've been reliant on working with national health ministries, that the information we've gleaned from cancer centers, patient organizations, etc., puts them, our job is to make sure that they have reality checks when needed, right? And we've been doing that in as fair and transparent a way as we can, to make sure that, because doctors and nurses and pharmacists and patient organizations on the ground, they really know what's going on. So being able to share that with governmental organizations is, I think, has been, for the governmental organizations, has meant that things have happened maybe slower than we would like, but faster than they would have done.
Got it. And in closing, what do you have to say to cancer organizations and oncologists in the US, whether it's about participation in ECO's efforts in Ukraine, or whether it's about building closer relationships, as you mentioned, in long term with cancer networks in Europe?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen it's always been the case with cancer, but I think it's been highlighted by COVID that we are one global population, that there's nothing about the Atlantic that's so special that it stops disease from spreading, right? And the US has a huge amount to offer. The US is a powerhouse of ideas and thought leadership and investment and innovation in cancer. And I've been working in the US since I was 19 years old. And I always think that the US is at its best when it's inclusive and global and sharing the fantastic experience of your country with the rest of the world, and learning as well from experience from other parts of the world. That's when I think the US is at its best, particularly in the world of medicine, which I used to work in cardiology, and you know, it's not just oncology, which is a little bit North American and European in its institutions, right? But I think this is an example, and I think COVID was an example as well, about how shared learning and shared experience and shared intelligence, data, anecdotes, all of that is a vehicle to demonstrating that we're all in the same business, we're all have the same mission, we're all about improving and saving lives, and what's going on in Ukraine is horrific.
I think that's most of the questions I have on the record. Did we miss anything?
No, I don't think so. Well done, Matt.
Thank you.